Welcome to the Genealogy Happy Hour, a place where new family historians can learn to document their family histories and celebrate their new discoveries. I'm Amy.
And I'm Penny, and we're here to help you discover your family tree from the beginning. Welcome to episode 26. In this episode, Amy and I are going to talk about newspapers and doing your research in newspapers for obituaries and
all sorts of interesting things.
And, yeah.
Newspapers should never be overlooked. You should research every one of your ancestors in newspapers because you never know what you're going to find.
Right, what the weather was like that day.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. John Coletta would definitely tell you to look up the weather for that day.
We keep talking about him and that. We're just so fascinated by that.
Yep.
By that thought.
He's very fascinated with the weather.
So before we jump into that, we'll apologize for this podcast being so late in coming. We were going to podcast
earlier in the month.
But
there's a hurricane.
Hurricane came through, and that pushed us back a little bit. And then we had some other things going on weekends, and this was the first time we could get together. Yep. So, as always, we will start with our wine selection, and Amy's got a really fun one.
Of course we're going to start with our wine selection. Oops.
We do have a collection, too, so it all works out.
Today, because this is the last day of September, October is coming up tomorrow, and I was at the wine store recently and saw this really cool wine bottles from Hobnob.
Because we do pick wine by the label.
We do pick wine by the label sometimes, yes, we do. And this is a really cool label. The Hobnob has a limited edition for October. They have a red blend, and they have a Wicked Chardonnay. So I chose the Wicked Chardonnay, of course, for us. It is wicked. It's very crisp. It's from California. It's a medium-bodied Chardonnay with notes of nuts and honey. So it's very good. So we're in our second glass.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So one thing I did want to mention, and I was super excited about, was that
we're on our second glass. Did I say that?
So the new Morton Ferrier book is out, and it's a novella.
But he's published in a different format. He hasn't published.
Right.
It's a short.
It's a short story. Nathan Dillon Goodwin is one of our favorite authors for genealogical mysteries. And this one, it's short. It's a quick read. And the minute he posted it, I jumped on Kindle and downloaded it really fast.
You were on it.
It was like $2.99 and read it right away. Really good, really good. So they've got a little new family member in addition to their family coming on board, and
don't give the whole thing away.
Well, it's in the synopsis. It's in there. You can read that. Okay. And but in the meantime, while they're dealing with that, he's researching his wife Juliet's family and comes upon an ancestor of hers that is was a suffragette. And quite a feisty suffragette she was. So it was very interesting, her tale, and a mystery that is in her life that gets uncovered in the end. So it's quick, it's engaging, it's really good. I learned some really interesting things about the suffragettes, and I really had a lot of fun reading his notes at the back on how much of that was true and how he used some really, authentic records to make this story. It was really good. So I highly recommend getting that. The Suffragette's Secret.
Yeah, we recommend all his books.
All
great.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I have not read it yet, so I will be.
Yeah, I won't give anything else away.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So newspapers. Yes, newspapers, very vital to our genealogical research. If you're looking for more ancestors who make or relatives who may currently be living, newspapers are often the way to go. In forensic genealogy, obituaries can give you a lot of information when records are more recent and we can't get a hold of those records. You often will be able to find relationships or individuals in obituaries. And we have to keep in mind now that obituaries are very expensive to publish. You can spend hundreds of dollars very quickly on an obituary published in a newspaper. So oftentimes the family will then publish just the free, maybe 2 lines, identifying the funeral home that they're using. And then when you have to go to that funeral home website, and then you have a full obituary there. So it's always a good idea if you're looking for recent obituaries to Google them or go to legacy.com and look for them there first. So then save them, because they're not going to be on there forever.
Right. And the most frustrating thing is when you find somebody and you find their obituary and you're really hoping to see the kids listed or something, and all it says is Frank Jones died on this day at this time.
Right.
Nothing.
I was looking at one on Friday from Canada, and it said full obituary will be published later. And I can't find that later obituary anywhere. So,
or maybe they've decided not to publish it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So, so always Google the individuals as well as look in the newspapers.
Right.
But that for obituaries, that only works going back to maybe year 2000. And then if they died prior to that, you're definitely going to have to hit the newspapers.
Yeah.
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 So there are what I call, I guess, the big 4 online digitized providers of newspaper articles. And these are not just obituaries, but they're all newspaper articles. And that's, of course, Genealogy Bank, newspapers.com, newspaperarchives.com, and chroniclingamerica.loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress.
Okay.
Of those 4, Library of Congress is free. The others are paid subscriptions. Yes, go ahead.
However, newspapers.com has a library edition, and so does the first one you mentioned, Genealogy Bank.
Yeah. Okay. They do have library.
They have library editions.
Just like Ancestry, you can go. You don't have to subscribe. If you go to the library and your library has a library subscription, then you can use them on site at the library. So that's great to know.
And hopefully your library, like ours does, you can do it from home. You just log in with your library card.
If you have a library card, exactly. Yes. And we're going to talk about local libraries because they are also a integral part of newspaper research. So, but let's talk about the onlines first.
Let's do it.
You have to really watch your spelling. So before you start doing this, write down all the variations of how the names could be spelled. Especially with Genealogy Bank, you're going to want to run the individual's first name, last name, and then if they had like a middle initial, run with the middle initial, or run just the initials, because oftentimes back in the middle of the 20th century or even beginning of the 20th century, sometimes individuals were identified only by their first 2 initials and the last name in an obituary. So J.B. Smith died.
Right.
So you need to, because if you just put John Smith, it's not going to bring up those initials when you do that search. So write down all the variables and run your search with all of those right. With Genealogy Bank, I found even if the person, they have an obituary section for obituaries from 1977 to the present. But I have found oftentimes that the individual's not in there, even though they did die after 1977. But you always need to also go look in those historic newspapers, because you're going to find obituaries in the historic newspapers rather than the obituary section sometimes.
Okay, sure.
They just have not been all categorized as accurately. So, and then always narrow it. I always, when I do my search, I narrow by region and by date. And if I can't find anything, then I start taking away those variables. Make my date range a little bit bigger. Go out into the surrounding states. And if you still can't find it, then do that nationwide search. We have a friend of ours, Judy, who had an ancestor, the Snake Man.
Right.
And who I believe was in the South, in Georgia or South Carolina. And she found an article written about him that had been picked up by the UP or the AP and was published in a Connecticut newspaper. Right. So if she had not searched nationwide, she would have never found that article, because the local papers do not exist or have not been digitized or weren't online. But that Connecticut newspaper was and had picked up the article.
Right. So it doesn't mean that your ancestor necessarily was in Connecticut.
Right.
It's just that the story was picked up.
The story was picked up
and published there.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Good tip. So another one, newspapers.com. And if you have an Ancestry World membership, you automatically get newspapers.com. You can always purchase it separately. I love newspapers.com.
I do too. I love Genealogy Bank as well.
Yeah. And everybody's got something a little different.
They do.
And I know on newspapers.com, when you go in there to research, they have a little map of the United States. You can click on the state that you're working in. You can put in your date range. And again, like you said, start with like the exact date you're looking for. And if nothing's there, start to broaden it out and maybe look in adjacent states and national.
Yeah. In each one of these, I have found that you need to search in each one of these, because I have searched in two and can't find anything, and then I'll go into like newspaper archives and and I'll find what I'm looking for. So because each one of these, and you can go in and look to see what newspapers each one of these services has in their collection, and they all have different newspapers from different regions. So you really do need to do a thorough check in all three of those paid subscriptions. And
MyHeritage, if you have a subscription to MyHeritage, in their research, you can just do a data subscription for MyHeritage, and they have a research, and newspapers is one of their subsections of that. And
newspapers.com?
They don't use newspapers.com.
I see what you're saying.
This is MyHeritage. They have other newspapers.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you can search specifically just under newspapers in the MyHeritage website. And I've found things in there that I have not found on newspapers.com or the other places, because they have different newspapers.
Right.
So, and really, if you find something, please make note of it in your research log or somewhere where that newspaper for that little town that you're looking for is. Like if you have the Elmira Gazette, and that the only place it is on newspapers.com or newspapers archives or whatever, make a note of that, so every time you go back to research, you don't have to go through all four of these things again looking for the Elmira Gazette. You know exactly where it is. It's this website.
That's a good tip for sure.
That's because I have had that problem where I didn't write it down and I had to go through all of them to find it again.
See, we learn from our mistakes. That's awesome. All right, so Chronicling America is, I think, sometimes overlooked. It's the Library of Congress. They have digitized historic newspapers from 1789 to 1925. It's free.
Free is good.
Free is good. So, again, you need to make sure that you go in there and you do your search, but then make sure that the newspapers in the area where you're searching are in the time period that you are looking for.
And some of them will be missing years or whatever. And this is on any of the sites. The newspapers will be missing a section. It's probably your section, but...
Right, they'll be missing the section, or they'll be missing that particular publication week. Some of these newspapers only publish. You need to make sure, were they published weekly?
Right.
Were they published daily? Were they published bi-monthly?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, the earlier newspapers were only published on a weekly basis, or once a month, or twice a month, or something like that. So you need to make sure that if your ancestor died on the 15th of the month, well, when would you think that they would have published that obituary? It might not be published for a week or two.
Right.
So you've got to make sure that you keep those time those time factors and the publication and the event dates in mind.
Well, another place to look is libraries, of course, and we love libraries.
We do. Libraries are essential to getting the obituaries oftentimes, because after you have gone online and looked on the online resources and you can't find anything, you have to contact the local library where your ancestor died, especially for obituaries, to try and get those obituaries. And you will find them there. And we're so thankful to all the librarians out there who are there just waiting for us to send in our request to look for those obituaries for us.
Down the obits, yeah.
So always go to the local library, go onto their website. Many of them will have the obituaries indexed, so they may not have them the images digitized, but they will have them indexed, so you can find, and that's very helpful to the library. And the more information you give them up front, the easier it's going to be to let them do their jobs. So, but then you email the library and ask them to send you a copy of the obituary and give them the information. Sometimes there's a small fee. Maybe
Yeah.
$1 or something. If it's free, I usually will send them a $5 donation, for their time and for the library, because it's a great service that they're doing, and it's their time, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
I know in Ohio, there's because that's where I do a lot of my research. There's the Rutherford B. Hayes.
yes.
Foundation, or I just know it's Rutherford B. Hayes, and they always have a lot of my obituaries will come up from there, but it will tell me what newspaper it was in. Yeah. So if I don't want to order it through them, and I've ordered quite a few through them to get it, but if I'm not really sure that's my exact ancestor, because I don't want to pay for it if it's not, I will take that information to the local library up there and my trustee librarian, and they'll usually look it up for me, and then I'll send them a donation, like you said.
And sometimes on Ancestry, you'll find in their obituary index, it will give you just the index information, but it will give you the name of the newspaper, or it will give you an abbreviation of the name of the newspaper. So you Google that abbreviation, it will tell you the name of the newspaper, and then you take that information and you go to the local library and then get a copy that way.
Right.
So
yes, especially when some of these newspapers are not digitized and out there, and the only way to do it is if they've got it on microfilm or
or yes, a lot of times they're going to be on microfilm, so it may take the librarian a day or two to find it. Yes,
but they usually come through.
They do, yes, and yes, wonderful.
And another spot that is usually overlooked are
universities. University libraries. For example, the University of Florida, their George Smathers Library has the P.K. Young Library of Florida History, and they have digitized Florida newspapers online. Now, these are usually limited collections, but very valuable, because these are usually going to be newspapers that you may not find on some of the larger online resources. University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign has some things online. Penn State University libraries have some things online. I mean, that's just a sampling of where you need to go to look. But they do have digitized newspapers, but they also have newspaper abstracts. So you can at least get some idea of what the article may be about, and then you can ask them for a full copy of the article. They also have on-site microfilm collections, so if you do live near the university, you can look at their catalog and then go and look at I've done that where I've driven up to Gainesville, which is only a couple hours, and used a microfilm on site. So these are all resources and repositories that we all need to be using in our genealogical research. What are we looking for besides obituaries?
Well, marriages.
We're looking for marriages.
Birth notices.
Divorces. I mean, I don't know if they publish divorce notifications in the newspapers anymore, but they used to.
Well, I read one the other day. It wasn't a divorce notice, but it was pretty funny. And it wasn't even the person I was looking for, but I always like it when I find those that in my searches there's come up some comical things. It was this person said, and I can't remember the name, but it was like John Burns put in a notice in the newspaper, just like a couple liner: "Do not trust Letty Burns, my wife. She has not been to my bed in a month. She is untrustworthy." Okay.
Wow.
And that's all it said. But that was a notice in there, and
you never know what you're going to find.
You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. So the divorces, and oftentimes they will say the date of the marriage in the divorce. Now you can go to the courthouse, depending on what state it's in, but you could get a copy of that divorce. And the great thing about divorces are they will often list the minor children's names.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that is going to give you a great document to link generations together.
Yes.
So look for those marriage announcements and the divorces. And I always like looking at the bride's pictures too.
Oh yeah.
I love the stuff, the hairstyles, it's just really, it's really cool. Newsworthy accidents.
Noteworthy accidents. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But accidents, promotions, if your ancestor was a blacksmith or a carriage maker, there might be an advertisement for his company in there.
Certainly.
certainly automobile accidents, all of those,
Right,
tragedies
right.
are going to be in there, but school activities and awards.
Yeah. Oh, we have done a lot of research on my husband's mom, who she and her sisters, when they were young, used to sing in this town production called an Eisteddfod, which was Welsh.
Okay.
And they, as children, they would sing and whatever. And she was wanting us to look that up, and I found a ton of articles in there
On the
about
group? Oh, cool.
with her mentioned and her sisters and what they were singing, and the whole. It was really fun, and it was fun for her because it listed everybody that did anything in that particular event, and she could remember. Oh yeah, I remember him. He, it was a lot of fun.
And how much
Those
fuller
things
do
are
you
neat.
get? You really get to know your ancestors so much more through these types of articles.
If they played instruments or
Right. They
whatever,
received a
you might
civic
never
award,
know.
or
Right, you
they
might never know they were part
saved
of
a
an
squirrel,
organization.
or volunteer work too. If they're involved in volunteer organizations, oftentimes those will be in the featured in the
Were
newspaper.
they in a club? Now, we have a friend in our little genealogy group whose mother was the president of a club, and she never knew it. And it was, I can't remember, she found that in the newspapers,
Right. Yeah.
and it listed her, as the president, and she's like, I didn't know my mom was in this
Her
club.
mother had never mentioned
Never
it to her.
mentioned it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Publications of probated estates. Sometimes, if our ancestor died, if they had a will or if they had property, then the estate would be probated. And sometimes you will get an idea of when that was probated by newspaper announcements. Real estate sold, bought and sold. You'll find those in the newspaper, so then you can go and look for deeds. So those transactions are often published, and those visitations.
Oh, those are the most fun.
Yeah, they are. They're a lot of fun. Because you think, well, who cares that so my ancestor was visiting so and so, but you get oftentimes those relationships are cited. They were visiting the sister. Well, did you know that your ancestor had that sister and that she lived in that city or that particular town? So those locations and those relationships often come out in those visitations.
And I think those help for dates too. I know I used the visitation ones when I was trying to get a wedding date for my great grandmother, who I thought lived in Deschler, Ohio at a certain time. But I found her in the newspaper visiting her friends in Deschler. So she was clearly not in Deschler then. She was living, I later found out where she was living, but it gave me those dates. Like, okay, so she's not there now. She's somewhere else, and she's coming into Deschler again to visit. And there were 2 of those notices, and the friends that she had visited. So that was helpful to place her at a certain time that I was researching.
Right, so you can add those to your timeline of your ancestor, and you can definitely see
where they're moving about on that. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I had an ancestor who there was an obituary published for him in the newspaper in Indiana, and it said that he had died in a car accident in Florida. So I was curious, and I got the death certificate in Florida, and the death certificate said that he was killed. He was murdered by being shot with a shotgun. So I went to the local library, and we have an excellent genealogical library in Tampa, Florida, and went to the library and about the time that he died, looking for articles, and because I figured if he was shot and murdered, there was going to be something published about it. And in fact, there were several articles published about the investigation, and then there was a trial. So you get to see a much fuller history of your family when you start looking at those things.
This also makes you realize you can't always trust everything that's in the newspaper.
Well, I hope we all know that.
Always a clue. It's always a clue to what's happening. And
absolutely.
So your story had,
Yes, the accuracy is again it depended upon the informant.
That is true.
Yeah. So that's why we have to look at all the evidence, analyze it, and then make a determination based on all the evidence.
And newspapers are not a primary source.
They are not, but we also have to do thorough, exhaustive research.
Yes.
And working in newspapers is a part of that.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I hope that
you all have great success in your research in newspapers and come up with, if you find some really fun stories, share them with us. Send us a note on Facebook or an email. We'd love to see what you find in the newspapers.
Absolutely. So until next time.
Cheers.
Right, cheers. Thank you for listening. Please email us with any questions or comments at genealogyhappyhour@gmail.com.
Visit our website, www.genealogyhappyhour.com, for additional resources, books, and wines. Don't forget to drink responsibly.
And never drink around genealogical documents.